Storm was supposed to be the most dangerous thing on that mountain. 2 officers, 1 isolated cabin, 0 radio contact, and somewhere out in those trees between the lightning and the black water, rushing down the ridge, something was moving toward them. Weather, not an animal. Men, armed, patient, and they'd been waiting for exactly this moment. Cole Barrett had spent years learning how to disappear, how to be invisible, how to let people see exactly what he wanted them to see, which was nothing special. Just a quiet father, a dog, a mountain. They had no idea what they were walking into. If this story already has your pulse up, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop your city and country in the comments so I can see exactly how far this story is traveling. Like the video, turn on notifications, and don't you dare move, because what happens inside that cabin is something you will not see coming. The emergency radio was giving Cole Barrett nothing but noise. Static, white, flat, useless. Static, the kind that fills your ears until it stops sounding like interference and starts sounding like the mountain itself trying to tell you something. He'd been at it for 2 hours, seated at the scarred wooden table near the window, a notebook open beside him filled with frequency logs and handwritten signal times. Cabin smelled like pine resin and coffee, gone cold, and the particular dampness that seeped through old window frames when a storm decided to mean business. Outside, it had already decided. The storm had come down off the higher ridges around 7 in the evening, and by 8 it was the kind of weather that made experienced mountain people close their curtains and stop looking out. Not because they were afraid of what they'd see, but because there was nothing worth seeing. So, just darkness and water, and the occasional white crack of lightning that turned the whole forest silver for half a second, before swallowing it back into black. Cole set the radio handset down and rolled his neck. 43 degrees on the porch thermometer. Barometric pressure dropping. He'd been logging readings every 30 minutes, the way the county emergency management coordinator had asked him to, part of a 6-month assessment of dead communication zones across Blackwater Ridge and the 3 hollow valleys below it. The work suited him. Quiet, methodical, isolated. Nobody checking over his shoulder, body asking questions. From the braided rug near the wood stove, Ranger lifted his head. At anything specific? Not yet. Just the posture shift of a dog whose instincts were sharper than most people's reason, a slow repositioning that Cole had learned over 6 years to pay attention to the way other men pay attention to weather instruments. Easy, Cole said. Ranger settled, but his ears stayed up. Cole wrote 2,237 hours signal loss on 155.34. Possible atmospheric interference or localized jamming will retest at 2,300 into his notebook and closed it. He stood stretched and walked to the kitchen to pour the cold coffee into the sink and start fresh. The wood stove had the main room at a decent temperature. Cabin was old, built by someone's grandfather, in a time when insulation was whatever you stuffed into the walls, and the cold pressed in around the door frames and the single small bathroom window in the back. He was measuring coffee when Ranger stood up fully. Aggressive, not alarmed. Just up, weight forward, facing the front door. Cole set the coffee can down without a sound. 3 seconds. 5. Then the knock came. Hard, urgent, the kind of knock that has no patience in it. The knuckles of someone who doesn't care whether they're being polite, because politeness has already become irrelevant to their evening. 2 fast beats, then 3 slower ones. Cole crossed the room in 4 steps, not touching the light switch. Positioned himself to the left side of the door habit, not paranoia, though the distance between those 2 things had narrowed considerably over the years. He angled his head to bring his eye level with the peephole. A woman, soaked. Her jacket was department issue law enforcement, dark reflect strip across the shoulder, and she was bracing herself against the door frame, like it was the only reason she was still vertical. Behind her, partially visible, through the heavy rain, another figure, also in department clothing. Cole unlatched the door. The wind tried to pull it out of his hand. "Sir!" The woman barely got the word out before a gust cut her off. Her face was pale and tight. A laceration above her left eyebrow, not new, maybe 40 minutes old. Dried blood tracking down into her hair. "Sorry, we need help. Our vehicle was compromised." Radio contact. Come inside, Cole said. He didn't ask questions. Questions could wait. He stepped back to let them through. The woman came in first. She moved with the careful deliberateness of someone managing pain. She wasn't acknowledging the slight favor of the left leg, the way she kept her right arm close to her ribs. Behind her, the man ducked through the door and Cole could immediately see the problem. His eyes weren't tracking right. The pupils were uneven, not dramatically, but enough. Left pupil slightly wider than the right. He was holding himself up through will alone and losing the argument. Close it, Cole said. The man pushed the door shut. The noise dropped from a roar to a low, constant moan. Ranger stood 6 feet back, watching both of them with the particular stillness that meant he was assessing rather than reacting. His training had cost more than Cole's truck. It showed. Sit him down, Cole said, already moving toward the kitchen. Chair, not the couch. I need to look at his eyes. I'm fine, the man said. You're concussed, Cole said. Sit down. A beat of silence. Then the woman guided the man into the wooden chair near the table, and he sat heavily, the careful way that people sit when they're afraid that if they let themselves relax, they won't be able to get back up. Cole came back with a flashlight, not the big tactical unit he kept by the door, a smaller penlight from the medical kit he'd updated 3 months ago after Mia had sliced her hand on a fence wire, and he'd realized his kit was 2 years out of date. He crouched in front of the man and clicked it on. Follow the light. The man followed it. Slow on the left side. Catastrophic, but not nothing either. How long ago? About an hour, the woman said. Tree came down across the road. Airbag? Deployed. But he was angled. Cole clicked the penlight off and stood. He looked at the woman directly for the first time. Deputy? Deputy Claire Dawson, Blackwater County Sheriff's Department. She was pulling herself together, the pain being filed away somewhere behind her eyes. That's Officer Luke Mercer, Ridgeline PD. We were running a joint operation in the Upper Hollow when the storm. Radios, she blinked. What? Cole nodded at the radio clipped to her duty belt. They're both dead. Claire looked down at hers. Yeah, we think the storm, the lightning. Can I look at it? She unclipped it and handed it over. Cole turned it in his hands. Battery compartment first intact. No water intrusion through the seal, which was designed to prevent exactly that in field conditions. Press the power button. Nothing. He examined the contacts, reseated it, tried again. Nothing. He handed it back and looked at Mercer's unit on the table where he'd set it. Same result. Cole said nothing for a moment. He walked to his emergency radio setup on the table and tried his own unit on 3 different frequencies. Static. He tried a 4th. Static. He tried the county emergency management channel. A long, flat hiss, like the air itself had been hollowed out. Colkin straightened slowly. He didn't look at Claire when he spoke. How long have you been on this road tonight? We maybe 90 minutes? We were running dark. Lights until we got clear of the staging area. Running dark up the ridge. It wasn't a question. Standard approach protocol for the operation. Cole nodded once. He looked at Mercer. You keep your radio on the whole time? Gnomes. Mercer looked up from the table where he'd been staring at his hands with the unfocused concentration of a man trying to stop the room from shifting. Had comms until... He paused, until the hollow. Specifically the hollow. Yeah. Lower fork of Sycamore Hollow, maybe 2 miles back. Signal cut and we figured the terrain... The terrain doesn't explain both units simultaneously, Cole said. Sycamore Hollow has line of sight to the relay tower on Pembroke Knob, because I spent 2 weeks mapping it for the county last spring. The room was quiet for a moment. Ranger had not moved from his position, still watching the door. Claire's hand had gone to the side of her duty belt, not her weapon just near it. The automatic geography of someone whose training was still running below the surface even when the rest of her was exhausted and wet and bleeding. What are you saying? She asked. I'm saying the failure pattern doesn't match lightning strike or terrain interference. Cole kept his voice level. It matches a localized suppression event. Something blanket jamming radio traffic in this area. The word hung there between them like smoke. That's Mercer started. Sounds like, Cole said. I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm just telling you what the data suggests. Claire looked at him differently then, with suspicion, exactly more like she was recalibrating something. Cole Barrett, I test emergency communications equipment for the county. He paused just long enough, among other things. Before she could follow that thread, Ranger moved. Toward the door. Toward the window. The big shepherd's head swung left, toward the dark glass where rain was hammering in heavy, wind-driven sheets, and the sound he made was low and guttural, not a bark. Not yet. The vocalization that Cole had learned to translate as, "Something is wrong with the geometry of this place." Cole was at the light switch in 2 steps. The cabin went dark. Mercer's voice startled. "Quiet." Cole said it without volume. Just clarity. He moved to the window without touching the glass. Standing to the side, using the same principle that kept him away from the front door, don't frame yourself. Give anyone outside a clear picture. He looked out through the gap between the curtain edge and the window frame. The trees were black shapes in moving darkness. The rain was coming sideways now, making it nearly impossible to distinguish individual forms. Lightning was still tracking across the higher ridge to the north, each flash giving Cole half a second of strobed, overexposed visibility. He watched a second. 5, 10. The trees moved in the wind. Just trees, just storm. And then in the gap between 2 white birches at the tree line, maybe 40 yards out, Cole saw something that didn't move with the wind. A shape. Still. Low. Patient. It was gone before the next lightning flash. Cole stepped back from the window. He turned around. Both officers were watching him from the darkness. Claire's hand now on her weapon, not drawn, but ready. "You saw something," she said. "Maybe." He crossed back to the table. "Tell me about the operation." "Cole, tell me about the operation, Deputy." He kept his voice easy, but there was something in it. Particular quality of a person who has learned to use calm the way other people use volume, not to soothe but to cut. The official version. The honest version. "What were you actually doing up here tonight?" Claire looked at Mercer. Mercer looked at the table. "We were tracking a distribution network," she said finally. "Running product through the upper ridges. Small loads, frequent runs, using the storm windows to move when air surveillance is grounded." She paused. "We've been working this case for 11 months. 3 separate interdiction attempts. 3 times the suspects cleared the area before we arrived." Cleared how? Clean. Like they knew we were coming. Cole let that settle. He didn't fill the silence. He'd learned in other contexts he didn't talk about in this cabin or anywhere else that silence is a better interrogation tool than most questions. "You think someone's feeding them your movements," he said. It wasn't a question either. Claire's jaw tightened. "We don't have proof, but you think it." "Luke doesn't," she said. And the way she said it made clear this wasn't a new conversation between them. Mercer looked up. "We have 1 bad operation. Maybe 2. Doesn't prove." 3, Claire sat. Tired. 3 operations, Luke. 3 times we set up, and 3 times they were gone before we got there. The last time, the surveillance team saw vehicle tracks leaving the staging area 40 minutes before we moved. 40 minutes. She looked at Cole. "That's not coincidence. That's intel." "Who else knew about tonight's operation?" Cole asked. "Standard briefing. 12 personnel from both departments, plus the watch commander." "Who knew the approach route?" "The route wasn't locked in until..." She stopped. Something moved across her face. "Until the pre-op briefing. 4 hours before we moved. And your radios went dark in Sycamore Hollow, which is about 90 minutes after the briefing," she said slowly. Cole nodded. He was already moving, pulling on the canvas jacket he kept by the door, checking his pockets by feel in the darkness. Waterproof case with the backup frequencies. The small LED headlamp. Pocket knife, the one that had lived in the right cargo pocket of whatever pants he was wearing for 11 years across 4 different continents. "What are you doing?" Claire asked. "The boot prints outside. I need to check them." "What boot prints?" He looked at her steadily. "The ones that weren't there when you knocked on my door." He held her gaze long enough to make the math clear. "Stay in here. Keep the lights off. Luke, don't fall asleep." Mercer said. He didn't sound offended. He sounded scared, which Cole respected more than bravado. Intervened. Cole opened the door in a controlled way, body behind the frame, pulling it toward so the opening was covered, and slipped out into the storm. The rain hit him like something alive, cold, heavy, relentless, the kind of rain that soaks through the seams of supposedly waterproof gear in about 90 seconds, and then just commits. Cole moved off the porch and went left, into the mud, crouching as soon as he was past the porch railing. He pulled the headlamp out and cupped his hand over the lens, using it the way he'd been taught to use a flashlight in environments where light discipline mattered. Brief, directional flashes, never held still, pointed anywhere that would telegraph your position. Porch steps showed 2 sets of tracks in the churned mud, consistent with the officer's approach, deep heel strikes from people moving fast and unsteady. The tracks came from the direction of the access road, which made sense. Cole moved around the porch perimeter, low and slow, letting the lightning do most of the illumination work and using the headlamp only in the gaps. He found them on the north side of the cabin, boot prints, different tread pattern from the officers. Larger base, deeper bite, the kind of sole that's designed for grip on wet terrain, not fashion. The prints came from the tree line. They approached the north wall of the cabin to within about 8 feet, then tracked along it toward the back corner. Cole crouched over the clearest print and studied it. Fresh. The edges of the impression were still sharp, the mud at the bottom undisturbed by rain infiltration. Maybe 10 minutes old, 15 at the outside. He followed the line back to the tree line with his eyes. Prints led in. They did not lead out. Whoever had made these tracks was still in those trees. Cole stayed down and completely still for 20 full seconds, breathing through his nose, letting the rain noise become background. Separating sounds. The storm had a rhythm wind gusts, every 8 to 12 seconds, rain fluctuating between heavy and heavier, the occasional crack from the trees, as a branch gave up the fight. Within that rhythm, he was listening for the sounds that didn't belong to weather. Told him something by itself. A person in those trees who had heard the cabin door open was now being very, very quiet. Cole moved back toward the cabin in a wide arc, staying out of the direct sight lines from the tree line. Came in through the back door. There was a back door, just a simple utility entrance that led into the mudroom and bolted it behind him. He came through into the main room and found Claire standing with her back to the interior wall beside the front window, her weapon drawn. She looked at him, and he gave a small negative head shake. She kept the weapon up. "How many?" she asked. "1 set of prints," he said quietly. "Maybe more." The rains covering the ground between the trees. "Yes," said Novri. Mercer had straightened in the chair, the pain discipline overriding his concussion response the way adrenaline tends to do when the situation offers no alternative. "We need to call this in." "With what?" Cole said. He crossed to his radio array and tried again, methodically. Every county frequency, the state emergency management band, the backup UHF band used by the Forestry Service. Static, 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 static. He sat back, looked at the unit, pulled his cell phone. 1 bar. He tried to dial the county dispatch. Call connected for exactly 2 seconds before the signal dropped and didn't come back. He put the phone on the table, face down. Ranger had moved to the center of the room and was standing between the humans and the front door, which was the dog's way of expressing a tactical preference that Cole found himself agreeing with entirely. "Okay," Claire said. "Okay. We're isolated, we're jammed, and we have a possible hostile outside. What do we do?" Cole looked at her. At the question in her face, not panic, not helplessness, but the genuine operational question of someone trying to recalibrate to a situation that had moved past their training. He'd seen that look before. Different faces, different places, different stakes, but that same expression. The moment when the plan dissolves and what's left is just the problem. Sitting there, waiting for someone to start making decisions. "We make this place harder to approach," he said. "With what?" "You're a radio technician. I have cord. I have metal cups, I have flashlights and a dog and 100 yards of tree line that somebody has to cross to get to us." He stood up. "It's enough." She stared at him. "You got a better idea?" he said. "I'm open." She didn't have one. Cole moved to the storage closet near the back of the main room, the narrow one he'd originally used for hunting gear before Mia was born, and he'd reorganized everything with the specific priorities of a person who was now responsible for keeping another human being alive. Pulled out a coil of 550 cord paracord, olive green, 300 feet, a canvas bag with the assorted hardware of someone who fixes things with whatever is available, a steel mug that clinked against 2 others when he pulled it free. Claire watched him lay it all out on the table. "Trip line early warning," Cole said. He was already cutting lengths of cord by feel, his hands doing the geometry without needing him to think about it. Stop anyone. Just to tell us which direction and how fast. He glanced up. You've done fieldcraft? Basic academy training. She paused. Nothing like whatever you're about to do. Then stay close and do exactly what I say. For the next 40 minutes, in the dark and the rain, Cole built a perimeter. He ran the first line between two pine trees at the edge of the porch, ankle height, the cord threaded through two metal cups that would chime when disturbed. He ran the second line along the north side, anchored to the cabin corner, and a fence post 20 feet out, with 3 small flashlights clipped to it at intervals not turned on, just positioned so that if the line was tripped and the flashlights fell, the sound and the roll of the metal casings across the hardwood porch would be audible inside. The third line went across the back, lower, harder to see in the dark. Claire held cords, past hardware, said nothing about the efficiency of it. Cole caught her watching him the way people sometimes watch a thing they've misidentified and are quietly revising their understanding of. He didn't explain himself. He came back inside, dried his hands on a kitchen towel, and checked on Mercer, who was fighting the concussion with visible effort and losing ground slowly. The man's color was wrong, that particular grayish pale. That means the body is routing resources away from cosmetics and toward keeping the engine running. You need to stay awake, Cole told him. Working on it. Tell me about the suspects. The ones you were tracking tonight. Mercer looked up. Why? Because I need to know what I'm dealing with. Cole sat down across from him. How many in the organization? Best estimate, 8 to 12 active movers. 3 or 4 leadership who don't touch the product. They use the ridge system. He paused, reorienting himself through the fog. Avoid the highway checkpoints. Move on foot in bad weather when drone coverage is down. Small loads, multiple runners. Armed, 2 prior arrests within the network. Both had weapons charges, 1 long gun, 1 handgun. Military background in the group? Mercer blinked. Former Army. Did 2 tours, got a dishonorable on the back end. Absorbed that. Okay? Mercer said. That's it? Just okay? It's what I needed to know. From outside, barely audible over the rain. A single clear metallic chime. Ranger's head came up. Cole was already moving. Past the table, past the wood stove, to the window on the north side. He pressed himself to the wall beside the frame and turned his head slowly until the view through the gap in the curtain opened up. The storm had backed off slightly, not stopped, but reduced from a roar to a heavy drone, the kind of reduction that lets other sounds start competing. Lightning still tracked to the north, less frequent now, the intervals longer between flash and thunder. In one of those intervals, in the brief white overexposure of a distant strike, Cole saw it. Past the tree line, deeper in the woods. A pulse of red light, circular, roughly 8 inches across, steady and mechanical. Lightning, not an emergency flare, a communications jammer, kind of portable unit that law enforcement agencies use to suppress radio traffic in hostage situations, that military units use to prevent IED triggering, that someone with the right connections and the wrong intentions might use to create a pocket of complete communications, silence in a stretch of mountain forest. Cole stepped away from the window. He looked at Claire. She was already looking at him, reading whatever was in his face with the trained attention whose life has depended on reading faces in fast situations. What? She said. Cole took a breath through his nose. You didn't get caught in the storm, he said quietly. You were driven here. She stared at him. The route you took. Timing. The radio's going dark at the exact point where the road forced you uphill toward this cabin. He kept his voice low and level. This is the only structure on this section of the ridge. The only lights visible for 2 miles in any direction. He paused. Someone knew you'd come here. The color left Claire's face. They used the storm as cover, Cole continued. Jammed your comms to stop you calling for backup. Put a jammer in the woods to prevent any signal getting out. He looked at the window, then back at her. They herded you, like game. The word landed in the room like something falling from a height. Luke Mercer had gone completely still in his chair. Why haven't they moved? Claire asked. Her voice was steady. Cole gave her credit for that. Because they're waiting, he said. For what? Cole looked at the window again. For us to figure out there's no help coming, he said, and make a mistake. Outside, the rain picked up again, hard and driving, hammering the old roof like it had a grievance with it. And somewhere in those trees, between the black trunks and the darkness and the red pulse of the jammer signal Coles had seen for exactly 1 second, something moved. Cole didn't move from the wall. He stood there with one hand flat against the old plaster and listened to the rain change, pitch against the roof, that particular shift from random percussion to something more organized, more directional, way storm sound behaves when it's being interrupted by something large and solid moving through it. Wind, not a branch, something with weight and intention. Ranger confirmed it without being asked. The dog had repositioned to the center of the room, which was his operational default maximum coverage of all entry points, enough distance from each wall to react in any direction. His tail was down. Not tucked, not afraid, just absent the casual wag that meant the world was normal. His eyes tracked the north window, the front door, the north window again in a slow, methodical sweep that no amount of obedience training produces on its own. That kind of awareness gets bred into an animal over generations and then sharpened over years of work until it becomes something close to a second language between a dog and the person who runs with him. Cole read it the same way he'd read it 100 times before, in places where reading it wrong had permanent consequences. Turned away from the window. "We need to talk about the layout of this place," he said. He kept his voice at conversation level, not a whisper, because whispers carry further than people think, and they announce anxiety in a way that a normal speaking voice doesn't. 2 points of entry, front door, back utility door. 3 windows that someone could push through, if they were motivated. North side, south kitchen, the bathroom in the back. The bathroom window is the smallest, but it's also the one I can't watch from the main room. Claire had holstered her weapon while he was outside. She drew it again now, not dramatically, just the practical motion of someone updating their assessment of the situation. "How many do you think are out there?" "Don't know yet. I don't guess," Cole said. "Guessing gets people killed. What I know is there's at least one set of tracks on the north side and a jammer running somewhere in the tree line at roughly 11 o'clock from the front porch. The jammer is the important piece. Why? Because it's not cheap equipment, and it's not something you grab off a shelf. Whoever is out there came prepared for a specific scenario." He paused. They planned for law enforcement radios. They planned for cell signal. They planned for the storm window. Mercer shifted in the chair and the movement cost him. His face went tight and he breathed through it slowly. "So this wasn't random. They targeted us specifically. They targeted the operation," Cole said. "You were the variable they couldn't fully control. Storm was supposed to do more of the work for them. Separate you, disable you, push you somewhere predictable." He looked around the cabin. "This cabin is the only light on this section of the ridge. The only place you'd logically come. And someone told them about tonight's operation," Claire said. "That's your problem to solve. Right now my problem is the next few hours." He went back to the storage closet and came out with a second canvas bag. Older than the first, the kind of bag that gets repacked and not unpacked and lives in closets for years, accumulating a specific gravity of purpose. He set it on the table and opened it. Inside, a folded rain poncho in dark green, 2 chemical light sticks still in their foil packaging, a compact trauma kit in a red nylon pouch, a handheld compass, 50 feet of black electrical tape, and, at the bottom, wrapped in a cloth, a fixed blade knife with a 4-inch blade and a handle worn smooth from use. Claire looked at the bag, then at Cole. He could see her doing the math again. The revised version, the one that was starting to produce answers that didn't match the label she'd put on him when she knocked on his door. "Radio technician, mountain recluse. Nice dog. You said among other things," she said. Pulled the trauma kit out and set it beside Mercer. "Check his pupils every 15 minutes. If the left one goes more than a millimeter wider than the right, or he starts vomiting, we've got a bigger problem than the one outside." "What?" "Among other things." She held his gaze. "What does that mean?" He looked at her for a moment. The fire in the wood stove was the only light in the room, and it carved the angles of everything into something more stark than daylight, would have the shadows under her eyes, the dried blood, at her hairline. the set of her jaw that said she was running on discipline and stubbornness, and not much else. It means I've been in situations where the radio didn't work, and the exits were covered, he said. And I learned some things. Like what? Like how to count. He turned back to the window. And how to wait. That didn't satisfy her. But she let it go, which Cole appreciated, because explanations took time, and time was the one resource he was watching drain out of the evening. He pulled on the dark poncho and went to the back door. You're going out again, she said. I need to look at the jammer. Get a better position on it. That's Cole, that's insane. If they're out there and I stay in here, we're waiting for them to decide when this starts. He checked the knife, not pulling it, just confirming its position. I'd rather have some input on that. Luke looked up from the table. His voice came out slower than before, the concussion thickening the edges of his words. You shouldn't go out there alone. I'm not alone, Cole said. He looked at Ranger. The dog was already at the back door. Cole went out low. The way the poncho's dark fabric absorbed what little ambient light reached the back of the cabin, and moved immediately right off the porch steps and into the mud beside the cabin wall. Ranger moved with him, not ahead, behind, parallel and slightly offset. The working position they'd developed across years of early mornings and late evenings in these same woods when Cole was training and the dog was learning, and neither of them had anything to prove to anyone. The rain was intervened. The rain was still heavy, but the worst of the wind had rotated, coming now from the northwest instead of directly north, which shifted the sound environment and gave Cole a better listen to the southeast. He moved along the tree line, parallel to the cabin, staying in the shadow of the pines, his feet finding the ground carefully. Fast. Fast was for open terrain when the priority was distance. Here the priority was information. He stopped at the corner of the tree line, where it bent away from the cabin toward the drainage ditch that ran along the north property edge. From this position, he had a diagonal view back toward the front porch and a partial view of the approach road through the trees. He saw the approach road. 2 vehicles, dark, no headlights, no running lights, parked off the gravel in the stand of Laurel, 50 yards before the cabin turnoff. Could make out the shapes during the lightning intervals. One looked like a pickup, high clearance, the other lower and boxy, possibly a utility vehicle of some kind. 2 vehicles. Cole counted again, working back through the tactical math. 2 vehicles suggests a team with redundant transport, someone who planned for the possibility of needing to move people or equipment separately. Minimum team size for 2 vehicles with this kind of operation. 4 personnel. Maximum, depending on vehicle capacity and mission structure, maybe 8. He didn't like the upper end of that range. Ranger touched his hand with his nose. A warning, a check-in. The dog's version of you still there? Cole put 2 fingers on the back of the shepherd's neck and pressed gently. Still here. He scanned the tree line from his position. Slow and methodical. Section by section, the way he'd been taught to clear a tree line in another life, starting at the near edge. Working depth, letting his eyes catch movement rather than trying to find shapes. Rain makes this harder. Rain makes everything harder, which is why people who plan ambushes in storms are either very confident or very patient or both. Then he found the jammer. It was mounted low, zip-tied to a fence post at the property line, the kind of galvanized post that separates the maintained land around the cabin from the Forest Service land beyond. The unit was roughly the size of a hardback book, matte black, with that 2 small antennas angled up, that steady red pulse that Cole had seen through the window. Range, he'd intervened. Range on a unit like that, depending on the model and the power setting, could be anywhere from a few hundred meters to half a mile. More than enough to blanket the entire ridge section. He memorized the position, counted the steps back to the cabin corner, marked 3 reference points in his mind: the fence post, the double-trunked birch 8 feet to its left, the flat rock at the drainage ditch edge. Then he heard something that wasn't rain and wasn't wind and wasn't a branch. A voice, low, male, coming from the tree line to the northeast, further than the jammer, maybe 60 yards out. Couldn't make out words. The rain was too heavy, and whoever it was had enough discipline not to project. But the cadence had the flattened, abbreviated rhythm of people talking about logistics rather than conversation. Task language. The kind of exchange you have when you're coordinating positions. More than one voice. Cole did not wait to hear more. He pulled back the way he'd come, moving quickly now, information gathered, exposure time accumulating past acceptable. He brought Ranger back in through the utility door, bolted it, stripped the wet poncho, and left it on the mudroom floor. He came into the main room, and Claire read his face before he opened his mouth. "How many?" she said. "At least 3 in the tree line. 2 vehicles on the access road." He went to the table and looked at his notebook. "Jammer is on the north fence post, property line. Can we disable it?" "Not without going through whoever's standing near it." Mercer made out a sound, not quite a word, just the sound of someone absorbing information that is significantly worse than they were hoping for. "We're what? We're surrounded?" "Not yet. They haven't pushed to the south side." Cole looked at the south window, the kitchen one. Either they don't have the numbers for a full perimeter, or they're holding it open deliberately. "Why would they hold it open?" Claire asked. "To give us somewhere to run." Cole said it evenly. "Classic funnel. You leave one direction unblocked, you put your people there, and you wait for whoever's inside to make a break for it." He paused. "Except the creek bed is that direction. The creek bed from the south side runs about 200 yards and comes out on the Pembroke Service Road, which is where they probably have the 3rd vehicle." Claire sat down on the edge of the couch. It wasn't defeat, it was the posture of someone doing the arithmetic and not liking the result. "So if we stay, they come to us. If we run into them. That's the shape of it, yes." "Great," she said. That's great." She pressed the heel of her hand against her forehead, just above the cut, not touching the wound itself. "How are you doing?" Mercer had his eyes fixed on the middle distance with visible effort. "I'm functional." "That's not what I asked." "It's the answer you're getting." He looked at Cole. "What do we do?" Cole had been quiet for a moment, which was a different kind of quiet from his usual economy with words. This was the quiet of a person running scenarios. Claire noticed. It watched him stand at the table with his hands flat on the wood, and his eyes somewhere that wasn't in the room. "The jammer is the lock," he said finally. "What?" "Everything depends on the jammer. No comms means no backup. Backup means they can take, as long as they want." He straightened up. "If we can get someone to the jammer, pull the power, or knock it off the post, we might get it some sick through before they can reposition." "Might," Claire said. "Might," he agreed. "Radios have been dark for a while. If there's a dispatcher running a welfare check on your last known position, all we need is a few seconds of open frequency. And getting to the fence post means going through the northeast tree line." "Yes, where there are at least 3 armed people." "Yes." The room was quiet except for the fire and the rain and Ranger's steady breathing from the center of the floor. "I'll go," Claire said. Cole shook his head. "Your leg." "My leg is fine. Your leg is compensating. I've been watching you walk for the last 2 hours." He said it without judgment, just fact. "You're favoring the left. That's going to cost you in wet terrain at night." Her jaw tightened. "So what's the plan?" "You go out there alone." And he looked at Mercer. "Luke." Mercer blinked. "I have a concussion." "I know. Can you hold a position at this window for 10 minutes? "I can hold a position. Not engage. Just watch the front approach, and call it if anything comes toward the door." "I can do that." Cole looked back at Claire. "You know how to run a radio?" "I've been doing it for 7 years. My backup unit is on the table. If I can get to the jammer and kill it, you'll have maybe 60 seconds before they figure out what happened and push to the cabin. You need to be on the county emergency frequency the second the static breaks." "And what are you doing during those 60 seconds?" "Coming back." She looked at him for a long moment. "You say that like it's simple." "It's not simple," Cole said. "It's the best option we have." Something shifted in her expression. Skepticism hadn't gone away, it didn't disappear. People don't work like that. They don't just flip from doubt to trust because the situation demands it. Underneath it, something was recalculating. She was looking at the poncho on the mudroom floor, at the way he'd come back in without sound, at the notebook with its precise handwritten logs, the way Ranger moved around him like an extension of his body rather than a pet following an owner. "Who are you really?" she said. "And don't tell me you test radios for the county." Cole held her gaze. "I test radios for the county," he said. The now sat there between them, like the period at the end of a sentence that implied a much longer paragraph. Before she could push further, The trip line on the north side fired. Not the metallic chime of the first warning. This was different. This was the crash of a flashlight, hitting the porch boards and rolling, the clatter of the metal casing, carrying loud and sharp under the rain noise, and then immediately behind it the sound of something heavy contacting the cabin's north wall. Knock. A deliberate press, the sound of a person flattening against the exterior siding. Cole had the knife in his hand before he'd consciously decided to move. Mercer had his weapon up, pointed at the north wall. Claire was at the backup radio, her hand on the unit, looking at Cole with eyes that had gone very clear and very focused in the way that fear sometimes clarifies rather than paralyzes. Held up one finger. Wait. 3 seconds. 5. The pressure against the north wall moved. Cole tracked it by sound, a slow drag of fabric against old painted siding, moving from north toward the front corner. Whoever it was, they were making a positional adjustment, moving to get an angle on the front window. Cole pointed at Mercer, and then at the Mercer nodded and shifted, keeping low, moving his sight line to cover the gap in the curtains. Cole moved to the interior wall between the main room and the mudroom, pressed his back to it, and waited, knife held low, the grip easy rather than white-knuckle. The way you hold something you might need to use quickly and don't want to fatigue your hand before you need it. The window held. The front door held. Nothing moved. 30 seconds of absolute tension in a dark room with a wood stove and a concussed police officer and a woman with a radio and a dog who stood in the center of everything like an anchor point. From outside further away, toward the back of the property, the crack of a large branch breaking. Wind. The storm had backed off enough that the random structural failures were less frequent. This was a deliberate snap, the kind made by a person who is moving through undergrowth and trying to move fast, and not quite managing quiet at the same time. Cole turned to the back door. Ranger turned with him. That's the south side, Claire said. Too quiet. I know. I thought you said they didn't have coverage on the south side. I said they hadn't pushed to it yet, Cole said. His voice was absolutely level. They're pushing now. The funnel was closing. Whatever window had existed for escape, for a run at the jammer, for any option that involved the outdoors, was narrowing by the minute, and everyone in the room understood it, even if only Cole had the specific vocabulary to name what was happening. The geometry of the thing was becoming clear. The storm had been used as cover for positioning. The jammer had been deployed to create isolation. And now the team outside was compressing the space, pulling the walls in, reducing the options from several to few to one. Cabin. Just the cabin. Cole put the knife back in his pocket and went to the table. Pulled the backup radio toward him and checked the battery full charge. He tried it on the emergency frequency out of habit and got the same dead static as everything else. He set it down. Looked at the wood stove. Looked at the north window. Looked at Mercer, who was holding himself together with something that wasn't stamina anymore, wasn't adrenaline, was just the particular human refusal to let the situation win before it's actually over. Looked at Claire, who was watching him with the expression of someone who has run out of alternative plans and is now entirely dependent on a person she's known for less than 2 hours and still can't fully account for. Ranger sat down at Cole's feet, just sat down calm and square, like the question of what came next had already been, and he was simply waiting for the humans to catch up. Exhaled through his nose. All right, he said. The word was quiet, not resigned. Just the particular sound of a decision being made by someone who has made decisions in dark places before and knows that the quality of the decision matters more than the comfort of the person making it. He looked at the window, looked at the door, and then the massive pine on the south side of the property came down. The sound was enormous, not the crack of the fall, but the impact, the earth-shaking concussion of 3 tons of tree contacting the ground at the exact angle of the cabin's back escape route, blocking it completely. The vibration traveling through the floor and up through the furniture legs and into the bones of everyone standing in the room. The lights flickered, went out, came back dim, running on whatever battery backup the old cabin wiring could provide. And in that brief half darkness, in the gap between the tree hitting the ground and the lights stuttering back on, something hit the front door. A knock, a blow, deliberate, heavy, the impact of something solid used as a ram once. twice, just door frame groaning in a way that had nothing to do with weather, and everything to do with the fact that someone on the other side of it had decided that patience was finished. Luke Mercer raised his weapon, and his hands were not entirely steady. Claire looked at Cole, and Cole looked at the door. His breathing had not changed. The door took the second blow, and the frame cracked. Through the old pine held, the deadbolt still seated, but the sound of it was wrong. The structural groan of wood that has announced its limits. Cole heard it, and made the calculation in approximately 1 second. One more hit like that, 2, and the lock hardware would pull free of the frame, regardless of the bolt itself. He crossed the room. "Get back," he said to Mercer. "Back, against the interior wall. Now." Mercer moved slower than he wanted to, the concussion stealing the coordination that his will was insisting on. Pressed himself to the wall beside the wood stove, with his weapon up and his eyes on the door. Claire had moved to the corner opposite, using the angle she'd positioned herself, so that anyone coming through the front door would have to turn 90 degrees to acquire her, which was exactly the right instinct. Cole noted it without commenting on it. She had her weapon in a two-handed grip, muzzle down at 45 degrees, the stance of someone who'd been through force-on-force training and retained it under stress. The third blow hit the door. The frame gave on the upper left corner a 6-inch split in the pine, the deadbolt plate pulling half free of the wood, the door swinging slightly inward at the top and holding at the bottom. One more hit would open it. Cole was already at the table, pulled the canvas bag toward him, and took out the black electrical tape and both chemical light sticks. Cracked one light stick, shook it green, dim, the color of something institutional and utilitarian, and set it on the table pointing toward the front window. Then he moved the table itself, dragging it 3 feet to the right, repositioning the light's source so that the green glow created a visible reference point from outside, while the area around the door itself fell into shadow. Light discipline. Make them look where you want them to look. "What are you doing?" Claire said, changing the geometry. He didn't look up. "When that door opens, they'll come in expecting to see people backlit. The light's not where they think it is anymore." A pause. "That's okay," she said. "Just okay." The reassessment continuing in real time. Cole moved back to his position. He looked at Mercer. "Luke, when this door opens, you do not fire, unless you have a clear target and a clear backstop. You understand?" "I understand. I mean it. Rounds go through walls in this cabin like they're not there. Claire is on the other side of that wall." He held Mercer's gaze until he got a definitive nod. "Claire, same applies. If I'm moving in that doorway, don't shoot into it." "Understood," she said. Her voice was tight but controlled. "Ranger," the dog looked at him. Cole made a hand signal, flat palm, fingers together, pressed downward. "Hold." The shepherd sank to the floor, behind the couch, invisible from the door, his chin on his paws, his eyes tracking Cole with the patience of an animal that has learned that the signal matters more than the instinct. Positioned himself to the right of the doorframe, pressed to the interior wall, knife in his right hand, because the knife was the ideal tool for what was about to happen. But because in a confined space with 2 officers whose sight lines he needed to keep clear, adding a third firearm to the equation created more variables than it solved. He breathed out slowly. 1 breath. The 4th blow hit the door and it came open. All the way the bottom hinge held, and the door swung to about 60 degrees and stopped, tilted, half-hanging. Through the opening came rain and cold and the silhouette of a large man in dark clothing, moving fast with his shoulder down, the momentum of someone who has committed to the breach and is past the point of secondsing it. Came through looking left, toward where the green light stick sat on the repositioned table. Cole hit him from the right. Not a tackle, not the kind of thing that looks impressive and requires ideal circumstances. Controlled collision, Cole's left forearm across the man's leading arm, redirecting the momentum rather than stopping it, using the man's own forward velocity to turn him, the follow-through that brought the man's wrist up and his shoulder into a mechanical disadvantage that the joint was not designed to resist. The man went down hard onto the cabin floor, leading with his knee, and the sound he made was involuntary to the sharp exhalation of someone whose body has just received information their brain hasn't processed yet. Weapon, a compact semi-automatic, hits the floor and skittered under the table. Cole stayed with the man, one knee on the floor, the knife visible in his right hand, but not applied. He needed the man conscious, and he needed him contained, not a body on his floor creating secondary problems. Cole said. The man stopped moving. From the doorway, the half-open, tilted, rain-soaked doorway, a second figure appeared. This one was more careful. He didn't commit to the breach the same way. Came in at an angle, using the doorframe as partial cover, which meant he'd seen what happened to the first man and was adjusting. He had a longer weapon, something with a stock, and he was bringing it up. Claire fired twice. The sound in the enclosed space was enormous, the kind of concussive crack that reorganizes your thoughts for a moment, everything going briefly white and then snapping back. The second man lurched sideways into the doorframe and went down outside on the porch, the wep falling across the threshold. The echo died. Rain. Wood stove. The first man breathing hard on the floor beneath Cole's knee. Mercer was saying something, Cole's ears were ringing, and the words weren't coming through clearly, but the tone was the controlled, clipped tone of someone doing a status check. Claire's voice came back equally clipped. Still up. Unhit. Her hands would be shaking now. Probably the first time you fire a weapon at another human being, the shaking comes afterward. During. The body holding itself together through the act, and then releasing once the act is done. Cole had seen it enough times to know the pattern. Pressed the first man's face to the floor and checked him for additional weapons. Secondary firearm at the hip. Cole pulled it and slid it across the floor toward Claire. Fixed blade on the right boot. He took that, too, and put it in his own pocket. Flex cuffs, Cole said. Red pouch in the canvas bag. Claire found them, threw them across the room. Cole caught them one-handed and had the man's wrists secured behind his back inside of 20 seconds. He stood up and moved to the doorway. The man on the porch wasn't going. Anywhere Claire's shots had been effective, and the man was down and still, slumped against the porch railing, with the rain hammering him indifferently. Cole checked for pulse and found one. Steady enough. He dragged the long gun inside, cleared it, set it against the wall. He looked out into the dark. One man restrained on the floor. One man down on the porch. The jammer was still running. The tree line was still dark. The third vehicle on the service road was still somewhere he couldn't see. Mercer appeared at his shoulder, half leaning on the doorframe, his face the color of old concrete. How many left? At least one that I know about, Cole said. Possibly two. The voice you heard in the tree line. At least two voices. One could be the man on the floor. Could be more. Cole stepped back inside. Close this as much as you can and hold this position. Where are you going? Cole looked at him. Mercer looked back, and something in his face shifted the question, recalibrating mid-air, becoming not where are you going, but who are you that you're the one deciding where you're going. 5 minutes, Cole said. If I'm not back, Claire gets to the creek bed and runs. I'm not leaving without you, Claire said from behind him. He turned. She was standing with her weapon still in hand, the green light stick casting its dim institutional glow across the side of her face. She looked angry. Not at him, angry at the situation, at the night, at the cold and the blood on her temple, and the fact that she was standing in a stranger's cabin while armed men tried to push through his door. The anger was doing useful work, keeping the shaking at bay, keeping her functional. That's a nice sentiment, Cole said, but it's not the plan. Know your plan. The plan is I go out and deal with whoever's left, and you stay in here and cover Luke in the door. That's not a plan. That's a sentence. It's enough of a plan. She stepped toward him. Cole, what is your background? I need to know. Right now, because I am making decisions based on what you are capable of, and I do not actually know what that is. Question landed differently than the earlier versions of it. Earlier she'd been curious, recalibrating. Now she was a law enforcement officer trying to make a tactical decision. And the information was operationally relevant, and she was asking him directly and without any softness in it. Cole looked at her for a moment. Navy, he said. Navy what? SEAL. The word sat in the cabin air between all three of them. Mercer's head came up from the doorframe. Claire didn't move, just absorbed it, her eyes steady on his face, doing whatever internal processing she needed to do. How long, she said. 11 years. When did you get out? 4 years ago. Why, Mia, he said, just the one word. The full answer. Claire looked at him for one more second. Then she nodded a single definitive nod, not deferential but acknowledging. The nod of a professional accepting an updated operational picture. Get killed, she said. I'm not explaining that to your daughter. Cole almost said something. Didn't. He pulled Ranger up from behind the couch with a hand signal and went out the back. The utility door. The mudroom. The cold hitting him like a wall. He moved south first, away from the known position of the man who'd been against the north wall, giving himself distance and an angle before cutting east toward the tree line. The fallen pine was enormous up close, the root ball. Cecile had pulled 6 feet of earth up with it, leaving a crater in the muddy ground that was already filling with rainwater. Tree itself lay across what had been the back escape route. The branches, dense enough that getting to him quietly would take 5 minutes he didn't have. Cole moved east along the fallen trunk, keeping it between him and the deeper tree line. Ranger moved parallel to him, 10 feet out, in the shadow of the pine branches. At the far end of the fallen trunk, Cole stopped and went to one knee in the mud. He was at the southeast corner of the property now, with the cabin behind him and the unmanaged Forest Service land ahead, the terrain dropping away toward the creek bed in a series of irregular shelves covered in wet fern and laurel. He stayed still and listened. Rain, wind intermittent. Creek, audible now running high from the storm, the sound of moving water carrying further than usual. And footsteps. Someone moving through the fern below the first shelf, maybe 30 yards downslope. Moving quickly, too quickly. For the terrain, the footfalls uneven, the sound of wet vegetation being pushed aside with urgency rather than care. Someone in a hurry, covering the south approach route that Cole had identified earlier as the funnel, which meant they'd gotten the signal, somehow, that the breach at the front of the cabin had gone wrong. Which meant they were communicating, which meant either the jammer had a gap he hadn't identified, or they were using a wired system earpieces on a closed circuit unit that the jammer's frequency range didn't cover. He filed that. Moved. Cole went down the first shelf at an angle, using the slope to build momentum without building noise, his boots finding the edges of rocks rather than the centers where mud would grab and release loudly. Ranger dropped lower and came in from the other side. The dog was reading the terrain and doing the same math, flanking without being told. He'd always thought that was the remarkable thing about working dogs. The obedience. Anyone can train obedience. It was the judgment, the capacity to understand intent and fill in the gaps with their own assessment. The figure was at the second shelf when Cole came around the laurel stand and found him. Big man. Bigger than the one on the cabin floor. This one had the particular build of someone who's spent years doing physical labor or physical training, both of which produced the same result for different reasons. He was wearing a dark jacket with the hood up against the rain, and he had a radio earpiece in his left ear and a handgun at his hip, and when he heard Cole come around the laurel, he turned faster than a man his size should have been able to. But fast and first are different things. Cole was already inside his reach. Problem with firearms in very close quarters, 8 feet or less, is that the weapon becomes a liability before it becomes an advantage. Time it takes to clear the holster and bring the muzzle to bear gives someone who is already moving a window that is small but sufficient. Cole had spent years working in that window. He knew its dimensions precisely. He took the man's gun hand at the wrist and used the man's own reaching motion to redirect the draw into a joint lock, the wrist folding against its natural articulation, the hand opening by reflex. The gun dropped into the fern. Cole followed through with a shoulder into the man's chest that drove him back against the shelf ledge, the man's boot heel going over the edge, the loss of ground contact doing the rest. They went down together, Cole controlling the descent, keeping himself on top and the man's arms occupied. The man was strong, stronger than the first one, the kind of strength that doesn't telegraph itself until it's already engaged. He got a hand free and caught Cole across the left ear with an elbow strike that was partially deflected, but still landed with enough force to make the world white at the edges for approximately 1 second. Cole pulled back and reset. The man tried to roll and get up. Cole caught his jacket collar and pulled him sideways, taking the leverage point away, and the man went face down into the wet fern with Cole's weight across his upper back. They stayed like that, Cole pinning, the man pushing, the push weakening by degrees, as the position denied him the mechanical advantage his strength needed to operate. 10 seconds. 20. The man's breathing changed from effortful to labored. "Stop," Cole said. "Quiet." Right at the man's ear, the man stopped. Ranger stood 3 feet away, with his entire body rigid, watching the man's hands with the absolute focused attention of an animal that has been taught exactly what hands can do, and is prepared to respond to any movement of them. Cole stayed where was for a moment longer. Not out of caution, the fight was done, but because he needed a second to let his own body catch up. His left ear was ringing from the elbow strike, and the mud was cold, and the rain was running down the back of his neck, and his hands were not entirely steady, now that the adrenaline had accomplished what it came for and was beginning to release his sofa. He breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way he'd been taught to do it in circumstances where breathing was the only thing under voluntary control. Cured the man's wrists with the electrical tape from his pocket. Not ideal, not flex cuffs, but the tape was what he had and it would hold for the time he needed, and stood up. He looked at Ranger. The dog's ears moved, not toward the man on the ground, toward the slope above them, back toward the cabin. Cole turned. From the direction of the front porch, a voicemail unknown, calling out with the flat, unemotional cadence of someone issuing a status check to their team. Answer came back. A second call. Slightly different tone. Quality of a person whose confidence in their operational picture has just developed a significant crack. Cole moved back up the slope. He went faster than he'd come down, the urgency changing the math on noise discipline. He needed position more than he needed silence now. Came up the east side of the property, past the fallen pine, past the property line fence where the jammer still pulsed its steady red at the post. He stopped at the fence, looked at the jammer, looked at the cabin, 30 yards north. The fourth man there was a fourth man. The one issuing status calls was somewhere between Cole and the cabin's front porch. Position unknown, and Cole was outside in the dark on uneven terrain, with a knife and a dog and a ringing ear and mud up to his knees. He took the jammer off the fence post. It was zip-tied 4 ties, which he cut with the knife. The unit was heavier than it looked, dense internal components, the weight of something that does CPS work. He found the power connection on the bottom edge, a REC switch under a rubber cover, and pressed it. Red pulse, stopped. The night went a different kind of dark, the same visual darkness, but something in the electromagnetic quality of the air shifting, in a way Cole couldn't see but understood. The invisible suppression field collapsing. Frequencies opening up across the mountain, like windows being unlatched after a long winter. Pressed toward the cabin. From inside, and he heard this clearly even over the rain, because Claire was not wasting the moment, the sharp crackle of a radio coming to life. The burst of static, resolving into something coherent, and then Claire's voice, clipped and professional, and louder than he'd heard her all night. "Dispatch. This is Deputy Dawson. Badge 477, requesting immediate emergency response. Blackwater Ridge, Sycamore Hollow Access Road, Ray, 3/4 mile north of Junction. We have multiple casualties and armed suspects. Repeat, requesting immediate." The fourth man came around the corner of the cabin and at a run. He'd heard the radio. He was heading for the front door. Cole cut the angle. He came across the front of the property at a dead sprint, covering the open ground between the tree line and the porch in the time it took the fourth man to process that something was coming from his left instead of the direction he was watching. Fourth man turned, and Cole hit him at full speed, the impact completely graceless, shoulder into ribs, both of them going over the porch steps and into the mud at the base of them. A tangle of wet clothing and impact, the particular confusion of bodies in motion colliding with a surface that isn't ready for them. Cole took the landing badly. His left shoulder hit a porch step edge, and the pain was immediate and specific, not a break, but the bone-deep throb of significant impact on a joint that was already at its working limit. The fourth man was up faster. He got a boot into Cole's ribs before Cole could get his feet. Under him 1-2, the second one catching the same spot as the first with the particular efficiency of a person who knows exactly where to kick a man who's down. Cole had a second where the pain compressed his breathing to almost nothing, and the world did that narrowing thing that serious physical pain does to a person's visual field. He got his knee under him. The fourth man reached for the firearm at his hip. Luke Mercer appeared in the cabin doorway. He was leaning on the doorframe, and his weapon was up, and his hands were definitely not steady. The muzzle was moving in the circular pattern of a man, the small circular pattern of a man fighting a concussion and fighting exhaustion and fighting the weight of the weapon simultaneously. But the muzzle was pointed at the fourth man, and the fourth man could see that it was, and could also see that a shaking gun pointed at you is not meaningfully less dangerous than a steady one, Mercer said. His voice cracked slightly on the word. Didn't matter. The fourth man's hand stopped moving, got to his feet. He put his hand out toward Mercer, the flat palm signal he'd used with Ranger, the universal hold, and crossed the remaining distance to the fourth man in 3 steps, and took the weapon from the hip holster before the man could recalculate. The man let him take it. Cole stepped back, breathing through his mouth now, the rib strike making the nose breathing he preferred functionally impossible for a moment. Stood in the rain with the fourth man's weapon in his hand, and his shoulder sending urgent reports up to his brain that he was filing under later, and the sound of Claire's voice still coming from inside the cabin, steady and clear, giving coordinates and descriptions to a dispatcher who was already routing units. He looked at the fourth man. The man looked back at him. Late 30s, hard face, the particular look of someone who has just watched a plan fail in real time and is now doing a very rapid personal inventory of his choices and their consequences. Sit down, Cole said. The man sat in the mud. Cole used the last of the electrical tape on his wrists and then sat down on the porch steps and put his forearms on his knees and looked at the dark tree line and the rain and the creek sound in the distance. His left ear was still ringing. His ribs were informing him of their displeasure with increasing specificity. His shoulder was going to be ugly by morning. He heard the cabin door behind him. No, Mercer lowered himself down on the step beside him, carefully. The way you sit when your head is doing things you'd prefer it wouldn't, leaning against the railing for the support he wasn't going to ask for directly. They sat there for a moment in the rain. 2 men on the porch steps of an old cabin on a mountain in Tennessee, at whatever hour it was now. The storm backing off by degrees, the lightning gone, yet just the steady, committed rain of a system that hasn't finished its business. You were a SEAL, Mercer said. Yeah, you couldn't have mentioned that at some point. Cole looked at the mud. When? Mercer thought about it. Fair, he said. From inside. Claire's voice on the radio. Still going. Steady professional cadence of a person who has held it together through things she hadn't trained for, and is now doing the familiar work of handing this situation to people who are coming with lights and help and authority. Her voice had that quality that Cole recognized from other contexts, the controlled flatness of someone who will do the falling apart later, privately, when it's earned. Ranger came up the porch steps and sat next to Cole, pressed against his left side, the dog's warmth immediate and specific in the cold, wet air. Cole put his hand on the back of the shepherd's neck. Somewhere down the mountain, through the trees and the rain and the creek sound and the retreating storm, the first distant wail of a siren began to rise. The first unit came up the access road with its lights cutting through the trees like something searching, rather than arriving the beams swinging wide across the wet pines, catching the rain in long diagonal lines before settling on the cabin clearing. A second unit, then a third, this one larger, the boxy silhouette of an emergency response vehicle with its light bar cycling, red and blue, across the mud and the fallen pine, and the 4 men in various states of restraint and injury that represented the wreckage of whatever tonight had been supposed to be. Cole stayed on the porch steps. He watched the vehicles come in and noted, without particular emotion, that his hands had stopped being steady. Badly, not the full body shaking of shock. Nothing that visible but a fine tremor in the fingers of his right hand that he recognized from other occasions as the body's invoice for what it had just been asked to do. He closed the hand into a loose fist and rested it on his knee. Ranger hadn't moved from beside him. The first deputy out of the lead vehicle had his weapon drawn before his foot hit the ground, which was correct procedure, and Cole didn't fault him for it. No. The deputy swept the clearing, identified the figures on the ground, identified the 2 men on the porch steps, and started issuing commands in the loud, compressed language of someone trained to control a scene they don't yet understand. Hands, let me see hands. Both of you hands out, stand up slowly. Cole stood. He kept his hands visible and away from his body, and moved with the particular unhurried deliberateness of a person who understands that rapid movement around drawn weapons is how misunderstandings become irreversible. "I'm Cole Barrett," he said. "This is Officer Luke Mercer, Ridgeline PD. He has a head injury. Deputy Dawson is inside." She made the call to dispatch. "There are 4 suspects on the property. 2 secured on the north side of the porch, and in the main room, 2 on the south slope. The one on the south slope has tape on his wrists instead of flex cuffs, because I ran out." The deputy stared at him. "There's also a comms jammer," Cole continued. "Units on the porch railing. It needs to go to your evidence team as a priority. The model and serial number may trace it back to the source." Another deputy had come up on the right side, and Claire appeared in the cabin doorway, behind the first one, her badge out, talking fast and quiet to the officer who'd reached her first. The scene was finding its shape, the organized chaos of law enforcement, arriving at something they need to reconstruct from pieces. Cole sat back down on the steps. A paramedic found him. Approximately 4 minutes later, a young woman with a kit bag and a penlight who crouched in front of him with the efficient, nonsense manner of someone who does this work in conditions like this regularly and has lost the capacity to be surprised by it. She checked his eyes, asked him to track the light, asked about the shoulder and the ribs. He answered her questions accurately and completely, which seemed to mildly surprise her, as though she'd expected him to underreport the way a lot of men in his general demographic category tended to. "The ribs might be cracked," she said, pressing along the left side with 2 fingers, in a way that confirmed her hypothesis through his involuntary sharp intake of breath. "You need imaging." "I know." "And the shoulder?" "It's not dislocated. Separation, maybe." "I've had it before." She looked at him. "Other places," he said. She taped his ribs with the compression wrap from her kit and gave him an ice pack for the shoulder and told him not to move around unnecessarily, which was advice he fully intended to follow for the next several minutes at least. No. Luke Mercer got a backboard and a neck brace and a ride in the second ambulance, which he resisted verbally until Claire put her hand on his arm and said something quiet to him that Cole couldn't hear, but that had the effect of stopping the resistance immediately. Mercer looked at Cole once before they loaded him, a long look that carried something Cole didn't have a clean word for, not gratitude exactly, or not only that, more like the expression of a person recalibrating the entire evening from a new angle and not being entirely comfortable with what that recalibration revealed. Cole gave him a small nod. Mercer nodded back and let the paramedics do their job. The scene took another 40 minutes to fully process statements. Photographs, evidence markers, the particular bureaucratic choreography of a crime scene being established in real time on a muddy mountain in the middle of the night. Cole gave his statement to a deputy he hadn't met before, a careful, serious-faced man named Ortega, who wrote everything down in a small notebook and asked good questions, and didn't try to lead the answers. Cole answered everything directly. What he'd observed, when, what actions he'd taken, and why, in what sequence. He used precise language compass directions, time estimates, distance in yards rather than approximate descriptions, and Ortega wrote it all down without commenting on the precision. When Cole got to the jammer and the tactical assessment he'd made, Ortega stopped writing for a moment. "You identified it as a jammer based on visual observation. Red pulse, steady interval, mounted low on a property line fence post in a position consistent with covering the cabin and the approach road. And you'd seen that type of unit before. Similar units. Different contexts." Ortega looked at him over the top of the notebook. "What kind of contexts?" "The kind I'm not going to detail in this statement," Cole said. "Hostile. Just clear." Ortega held his gaze for a moment, then wrote something down and moved on. The 4th man, the one Cole had taken down on the front porch, turned out to be carrying 2 phones, a folded paper with frequency notations that matched the county emergency band schedules, a second-generation radio scanner with a law enforcement decryption module that was technically illegal for civilian ownership and practically useful for anyone wanting to monitor police traffic in real time. The evidence team flagged all of it, and Cole watched them bag it, from the porch steps with the ice from the porch discom and the compression wrench wrap, making every breath an exercise in managed discomfort. It was Claire who found him there an hour after the first units arrived. She came around the side of the cabin from the direction of the evidence staging area, her hair still damp, but her jacket replaced with a dry one somebody had produced from somewhere. Cut above her eye had been butterfly closed with 2 small strips and cleaned, which made it look smaller and more serious simultaneously. She was carrying 2 paper cups, and she held one out to him without preamble. Coffee, from somewhere, hot enough to justify the term. He took it. She sat beside him on the step that Mercer had vacated, and wrapped both hands around her own cup and looked at the clearing, where the light bars were still cycling and his team was working the north side of the property with portable floods, and said commitants. No, and said nothing for a while. Cole drank the coffee. It was too strong and not quite hot enough, and it was the best thing he'd tasted in hours. State investigators are coming up in the morning, Claire said eventually. They want to talk to you, I figured. The scanner they found on the 4th suspect, it has a log. Call records. Stored intercepts. She paused. 11 months of them. Cole looked at her. 11 months, she repeated. Our entire investigation. Every briefing we transmitted over the radio. Every location check. Every unit movement. She pressed her lips together. That's not just someone leaking from inside. That's someone who knew we were being monitored and let it run. The insider, Cole said. Or someone above the insider. She turned the cup in her hands. We had 3 failed operations. I kept thinking 1 bad leak, maybe. That's a pattern. 3, she shook her head. 3 means someone was managing it, controlling what information went out, and when, making sure we never got close enough to trigger a response, but never got a successful arrest either. Someone who understood both sides of the operation. Cole thought about the frequencies notations on the folded paper, from the 4th man's pocket. Paper with the frequencies. Those are intersal assignment rotations. Those aren't publicly scheduled. They get distributed at the watch commander level. That too. Not upset past upset. Into the particular emotional territory that comes after the shock of a betrayal has been absorbed, and what's left is just the cold, factual understanding of it. He didn't say anything else on that subject. It wasn't his to say. The sky to the east had started making the first, almost imperceptible adjustment from absolute black toward something, with a tiny bit of depth to it. Dawn too early for that. Just the suggestion that dawn was somewhere in the chain of events ahead. Can I ask you something? Claire said. Go ahead. When you were in there, she stopped. Try it again. When those men came through the door, you didn't look scared. Cole turned the cup in his hands. I was scared. You didn't look it. Looking scared and being scared are different things. He paused. I've just had a lot of practice, not letting one affect the other. She was quiet for a moment. 11 years is a long time. It's enough time to learn some things. What made you stop? He looked at the tree line, the one he'd moved through twice tonight, in the dark and rain. My wife died, he said. Mia was 4. I was in the middle of a workup for another deployment, and I came home and I looked at my kid, and he stopped. I made a choice. Claire didn't say I'm sorry the way most people do, reflexively filling the space. She just let it be what it was, which Cole appreciated more than he would have appreciated the other thing. She's 8 now, he said. Where is she tonight? My sister's. In town. He paused. She thinks I'm on the mountain testing weather equipment. You are on the mountain testing weather equipment. Among other things, Cole said. Claire made a short sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. The situation hadn't quite earned a full one yet. A vehicle Cole hadn't seen before came up the access road, not a marked unit, not an ambulance. A dark SUV, state plates, the particular anonymity of official presence that doesn't want to be identified until it chooses to be. It parked at the edge of the clearing, and 2 people got out, both in civilian clothes, both moving with the unhurried certainty of people who have arrived to take charge of something. Cole watched them sweep the clearing. Watched the lead one male, 50s, gray at the temples, a face that had the specific set of someone who has been woken from sleep for serious reasons and has processed the transition from one state to the others and is now entirely focused, watched him. Locate Claire on the porch steps and change direction. Claire stood. Deputy Dawson. The man stopped in front of the porch steps. He had a badge case in his hand. Special Agent Warren Briggs, State Criminal Investigation Division. We spoke on the phone 3 months ago. I remember, Claire said. You filed a confidential concern report about possible intelligence leakage within the operation. I did. You were told there was no substantive basis for an internal review at that time. I was. Briggs looked at the clearing, at the evidence flags, at the suspects being processed near the tree line, the jammer unit in its evidence bag on the porch railing. He looked at all of it for approximately 10 seconds. I owe you an apology, he said. The delivery was direct, performative. We should have moved faster. Claire said nothing. The silence was its own response. Briggs looked at Cole. Mr. Barrett. Cole looked back at him. Agent Briggs, your statement's been relayed to my team. Briggs studied him with the measured attention of a person who assesses people professionally. Former SEAL, currently contracted for county emergency communications. That's right. The tactical response tonight securing 4 armed suspects, disabling the jammer, maintaining officer safety. Briggs paused. That's a significant set of actions for a civilian communications contractor. The situation required it, Cole said. Walk me through the decision to go outside after the first contact with the suspects. Cole walked him through it. He did it the same way he'd done it with Ortega, precise, sequential, no editorializing. Briggs listened without interrupting, which was a different technique from Ortega's, and when Cole finished, there was a brief silence. The jammer, Briggs said, disabling it before re-engaging the 4th suspect rather than after. Why? Because comms were the priority. Getting a signal out meant help was coming regardless of how the next 30 seconds went. Cole said it without elaborating on what the other half of that calculation was. Briggs was smart enough to fill in the rest. Briggs was quiet for a moment. Scanner log we recovered. This is going to open a significant internal investigation. Claire said. It may be uncomfortable for people in your department. Now that too. Are you prepared for that? She looked at him steadily. Agent Briggs, I've been preparing for it for 11 months. Briggs held her gaze, nodded once. He turned to Cole. We're going to need a comprehensive statement from you. More detailed than what you gave Deputy Ortega. When? Tomorrow afternoon, if your injuries allow. Our field office in Kenton. I can do that. I may also want to discuss the communications gap analysis you've been conducting for the county. Briggs said it casually, but nothing about his delivery was casual. The dead zones you've identified on the ridge. The relay tower mapping. Cole looked at him. Why? Because the jammer placement tonight was very precise. Whoever selected that fence post position knew the property layout, knew the signal coverage from the Pembroke relay, and knew which frequencies to suppress. Briggs paused. Level of precision suggests research. Your survey work may have produced documentation that someone accessed. Cole hadn't considered that. He considered it now rapidly, working backward through the last 6 months, the survey reports, the frequency maps, the coverage diagrams he'd filed with the County Emergency Management Office. Yes, all of it technically internal, all of it filed through standard county channels. County system, Cole said, is a reasonable place to start looking. Yes. Briggs let that sit. Your work may have been used to plan this operation against you. The irony of that was specific and unpleasant. Cole absorbed it. I'll bring everything I have, he said. Briggs gave him a card and moved away toward the evidence staging area, his partner falling in beside him. Cole watched them go. Claire sat back down. She looked tired, not the performance of tiredness, but the real the kind that sets into a person's posture and makes them slightly smaller than they were before the night started. He believed me, she said. 3 months ago he told me there was no basis for review and sent me a form letter. He believes the evidence, Cole said. Not the same thing. She looked at him sideways. That's a cynical reading. It's an accurate one. Evidence makes decisions easy. People believe evidence because it removes the cost of believing someone. He paused. Tonight produced a lot of evidence. Is that how it works where you came from? Pretty much everywhere. She was quiet. Then, thank you. For all of it. The whole night. Cole turned the empty coffee cup in his hands. I would have managed differently. She said it without modesty, just as a factual distinction. Luke would probably be in significantly worse shape, and the outcome on the 4th suspect is I don't know how that plays out without you on that porch. Mercer held the doorway, Cole said. He did. That mattered. If he hadn't come to the door when he did, Cole paused. The fourth one was faster than I expected. I needed the 2 seconds. She looked at him. You're giving Luke credit. Luke earned credit. You could have handled it. Maybe. Maybe not. I was down, and my ribs were informing me of their opinion about my career choices. He put the empty cup down on the step. I handles things entirely alone. Anyone who tells you different is either lying or has never been in an actual situation. Claire looked at her hands. He doubted me, she said. For months. The leak theory. He thought he used the word paranoid once. Didn't mean it harshly, I think. Just genuinely thought I was pattern matching onto noise. He came to the door, Cole said again. Whatever he thought 3 months ago, tonight he came to the door. She didn't respond to that. But something in her posture shifted the specific adjustment of a person who has been carrying a weight and has just put it down and is deciding whether to pick it back up or leave it there. Sky to the east had changed again. Definitely lighter now, not dramatically more the way things become lighter before you can actually point to the light. The world recovering its depth and texture at a time. Cole's phone had signal. He'd checked it when the jammer went offline and found 3 missed calls from his sister, the first 2 from early evening, routine, the third from 20 minutes ago, probably triggered by scanner traffic or a call from someone in town who'd heard something on the emergency band. Called her back. She answered on the second ring, which told him she'd been awake. What happened? I'm seeing there are units going up the ridge, someone said. Everything's fine, he said. I'm fine. Ranger's fine. You don't sound fine. I sound tired. What happened? He looked at the clearing, at the lights at the morning beginning its slow arrival over the eastern ridge line. I'll explain tomorrow. Is Mia asleep? She's been asleep since 9. Tell her I called. Tell her Ranger found his ball. The ball was still on the porch, where the dog had brought it from. Inside at some point during the evening, the battered tennis ball that Mia threw, and Ranger retrieved with a patience for the game that his owner did not fully share. I'll come down in the morning. He ended the call and sat with the phone in his hand for a moment. Ranger put his head on Cole's knee. Cole scratched the dog's ears. The morning continued arriving. At some point, another vehicle came up the road, this one marked Blackwater County Sheriff's insignia on the door, and the man who got out of it was wearing a duty uniform that had not been slept in, which meant either he'd been woken and dressed or he'd never gone to sleep, and the expression on his face as he crossed the clearing. Toward Claire suggested the latter. He was maybe 60, stocky, the particular build of a man who was fit for a long time and has settled into something that still carries the frame of it. Sheriff's star on the chest, 4 stripes on the sleeve. He stopped in front of Claire. Cole stayed where he was on the steps and listened, because the clearing was quiet enough now that the conversation was audible without trying. Dawson. The sheriff's voice was low. You want to explain to me why I'm getting a call from State CAD at 2 in the morning about an officer-involved operation on Blackwater Ridge that I was not briefed on? Because I didn't brief you, sir, Claire said. I can see that. I didn't brief anyone above the operational level. By design. A pause. You're saying you ran a unilateral operation. I'm saying the briefing chain for the previous 3 operations produced compromised outcomes. Reduced the briefing chain. That's not your call to make. Sir, it isn't. She held his gaze. But 3 operations failed, and 11 months of work disappeared. And the last time I raised the leak theory through official channels, I got a form letter. She paused. So I made a call. The sheriff looked at the evidence staging, at the suspects, at the jammer in its evidence bag. He looked at all of it for a long moment. The scan, sir, he said. 11 months of intercepts, sir. State CID has it. Who on my department? That's State CD's determination to make, not mine. His jaw moved. Something working through him, not just anger, something more complicated than that. Particular expression of a person who is confronting the possibility that something happened inside a thing they are responsible for, and working out what that means for the nuanced understanding of that thing. Are you injured, he asked. Manageable, sir. Luke Mercer? Concussion. He's been transported. The sheriff looked at Cole. You're the civilian. Cole Barrett, Cole said. You live up here. Emergency communications contractor. Yes, sir. The sheriff looked at him for a moment, with the measuring that people in authority use to deciding how to categorize someone. You have military background. I do. What branch? Rate? Cole looked at him. Special warfare operator, he said. The formal designation, the one that was accurate, without being the shorthand that invited follow-up questions he wasn't in the mood for. The sheriff held his gaze for a beat longer than was entirely comfortable. Then he nodded, a single nod, slow, the nod of a man filing information and deciding something about it. I'll need your statement formally recorded, the sheriff said. Tonight. Tomorrow, State CD already asked, Cole said. I'll do both. The sheriff turned back to Claire. He looked like he was going to say something else. Something in the category of the conversation that still needed to happen between a department head and an officer who had made unauthorized operational decisions, regardless of the outcome. He looked at her face, at the butterfly strips and the dried mud, and the 11 months sitting visibly in her posture. He said instead, quietly, "You did good work tonight." Claire said nothing for a moment. Luke held the doorway, she said finally. The sheriff looked at her. Something in his expression shifted, not quite understanding the specific reference, but understanding the intention behind it. Went to talk to Briggs. The morning kept coming. Cole eventually moved from the porch steps to inside the cabin, where someone had righted the furniture that had been knocked during the entry and the wood stove was still going. The fire lower now, but the room still warm. Someone from the evidence team had left a bottled water on the table, which Cole drank in its entirety without sitting down, then sat down in the chair that Mercer had occupied during the worst of his concussion symptoms and looked at the room. The jammer was gone in evidence now. His backup radio was gone, also in evidence. The first man secured wrist bindings and the second man's weapon from the porch, and the assorted debris of a cabin that had been used as a tactical position were either bagged or cleared or still being cataloged by the two evidence technicians. Working the space around him with a pragmatic indifference to his presence that he found he didn't mind. His notebook was still on the table. He picked it up. The last entry, and 2,237 hours signal loss on 155.34. Possible atmospheric interference or localized jamming will retest at 2,300. He looked at that for a long moment. Then he found a pen in his jacket pocket and wrote below it, SIG confirmed source identified and disabled. 312 hours. Will require full documentation. Closed the notebook. Ranger came in from outside and lay down at his feet. Cole put his hand on the dog's back and felt the steady rise and fall of the animal's breathing, the specific reassurance of a living thing that is entirely present and entirely uncomplicated. His shoulder throbbed. His ribs throbbed. His ear had stopped ringing and started aching, which was its own kind of progress. Claire came in and sat across the table from him, and didn't say anything right away. They sat in the warm room, with the evidence technicians working around them, and the light outside continuing to change, and the sound of radio traffic from the units in the clearing filtering through the damaged doorframe. The insider, Claire said eventually. Briggs thinks they'll have a name within 24 hours. Scanner log has call timing. When you match call timing to duty rosters, it narrows fast, Cole said. Yeah. She turned her cup. She'd found more coffee somewhere. 11 months of someone sitting at a desk and watching us fail and going home and sleeping fine. No, they slept fine. She looked at him. People carry things differently, Cole said. Doesn't make it better. Just means you can't know what it costs them. Does it matter what it costs them? He thought about it honestly. No, he said. Not really. It's worth remembering that people who do bad things are still people. Makes it less, he paused. Makes it less likely you'll miss the next one. Because next time, it might not look like a monster. Look like someone who couldn't sleep. Claire was quiet for a long moment. You think about this stuff a lot. I thought about it enough in other contexts that it became habit. The things you did before. Some of it, Cole said. Parts that are useful to think about. She looked at him steadily. What about the parts that aren't? He looked back at her. I have a dog, he said. And an 8-year-old who throws a tennis ball badly and thinks it's hilarious when Ranger brings it back anyway. He paused. That covers most of it. Outside, The sky had gone from the suggestion of morning to something actual, a gray-blue gathering of light in the east that was starting to catch on the wet treetops and turn them from black to green. The storm was completely over. The creek was still running high and audible. The air that came through the broken doorframe was cold and clean in the specific way that mountain air gets after a heavy rain, like it has been washed of everything that was in it before and is starting again from nothing. Cole stood up carefully, testing the ribs, and walked to the doorway, and then stood there looking at the clearing and the vehicles, and the people working the scene, and the sky doing what it was doing to the east. Rangers stood beside him. The morning came over the ridge in stages, way things that have been in the dark for a long time come into the light, not all at once. Announcement, and just gradually, and then more gradually, and then suddenly enough that you notice it has happened and cannot identify the exact moment when it did. The drive down the mountain took 20 minutes longer than it should have, because Cole drove slowly. From caution, the road was clear, the storm fully gone, the gravel wet but solid. He drove slowly because his ribs made every pothole, a conversation he didn't want to have, and because the compression wrap the paramedic had applied was doing approximately 60% of the job it was supposed to do, which was 60% more than nothing, but still left the remaining 40% making itself known on every significant bump. Ranger rode in the back seat with his chin on the center console, which he was not supposed to do, and which Cole did not correct this morning. The town was already awake when he came off the ridge road. Fully, not the full morning commerce of a weekday, but the particular early wakefulness of small mountain communities where news travels faster than sunrise and where a night of emergency vehicles moving up a county road does not go unnoticed by the people who live at the base of it. The diner on Main had its lights on. Two men Cole didn't know well stood outside the hardware store talking in the way people talk when they're discussing something specific that they're uncertain about. His sister's house was 4 blocks off Main, 2-story, with yellow trim that she'd painted herself 3 summers ago. And that still looked better than most of the houses on the street because she was the kind of person who did things completely or not at all. Car was in the driveway. The front porch light was on. Cole parked and sat in the truck for a moment. He looked at his hands on the wheel. The tremor was gone, had been gone for 2 hours. Yet he'd intervened, but his hands looked unfamiliar to him in the early morning light, in the way they sometimes did after a night that had required them to do things he didn't do anymore. The knuckles slightly swollen on the right, the mud still in the creases around the left wrist that he'd missed when he'd cleaned up at the cabin. He got out. Ranger jumped down behind him. His sister opened the front door before he reached the porch steps, which meant she'd been watching from the window, which meant she'd been awake for a while. She was still in the clothes she'd worn the day before, dark jeans, a flannel shirt, and she looked at him the way older siblings look at the people they grew up worrying about, which is a specific combination of relief and exasperation that doesn't have a clean name. "You look terrible," she said. "I know. Are those your ribs?" "Some of them. Yeah." She stepped back to let him through. "Mia's asleep. She didn't hear you come in last night when I got the call from dispatch, so she doesn't know anything happened. She just knows you weren't here when she went to bed. You want to tell me what actually happened?" Later, Cole said, "I need coffee first." She made it without arguing, which was its own form of grace. He didn't fiend. They sat at her kitchen table, the same table that had been in their parents' kitchen when they were children, 3 times and refinished once, and still fundamentally the same piece of furniture. And Cole drank the coffee and gave her the version of the night that was true, without being everything. She listened without interrupting, which was something she'd learned to do over years of getting information from him in pieces, and had decided was more efficient than trying to get it all at once. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You could have called me," she said. "Radios were jammed. I mean before. When you knew something was wrong. There wasn't time." She looked at him. "There's never time. That's always the answer." Cole didn't have a good response to that because it was accurate. He drank his coffee. "She's going to want to know why you're moving like that," his sister said, meaning Mia. "I'll figure out something, Cole. I'll tell her the truth, that I got hurt a little bit and I'm fine. And the rest of it?" He looked at the table. "She's 8. She's smart. She's 8 and smart," Cole said. "She doesn't need the rest of it." Yet, his sister looked at him for a long moment with the particular expression of someone who disagrees but has chosen the hill she was to die on. And this isn't it. She refilled his coffee. Mia came downstairs at 7:15. She was wearing the oversized t-shirt she used as pajamas, and her hair was doing something complicated that sleep had apparently authored, and she came into the kitchen already mid-sentence about something that had happened in a dream, the way 8-year-olds arrive in rooms fully operational, no warm-up period, just immediately and completely themselves. She stopped when she saw Cole. Daddy. Not a question. Just the word, said the way you say something that you've been wanting for a while and had started to be seen uncertain about. Hey, Bug. She crossed the kitchen in approximately 1.5 seconds, and Cole caught her with his right arm because his left one wasn't going to manage it, and held her against his side while she pressed her face into his shoulder and didn't say anything for a moment. Ranger pushed his nose under her free arm. She pulled back and looked at Cole's face with the forensic attention of a child who is checking for damage. You got hurt. A little bit. Ribs. Shoulder. I'm okay. She looked at the shoulder, at the slight stiffness in how he was sitting. She was doing math, he could see it. The same methodical assembly of evidence that he did, which he tried not to find either amusing or alarming depending on the day. How bad? Bad enough that I'm not throwing the ball for a couple days, Cole said. You'll have to do it yourself. She looked at Ranger. He won't like that, he'll manage. She settled into the chair beside him, still close, one hand on the table near his, holding it just near it. The particular proximity of someone who has checked the situation and decided staying in range is sufficient. Aunt Dee said there were a lot of police cars last night, Mia said. Were they looking for something? They found it. She thought about that. Were you helping? Cole looked at her. He said, I was. She nodded as though this was consistent with her existing model of how the world worked, which maybe it was. She reached over and scratched Ranger's ear. Good boy, she told the dog, in the tone of someone conferring a specific commendation rather than offering general affection. Ranger's tail moved. Cole sat at his sister's kitchen table with his coffee and his cracked ribs and his daughter's hand near his on the table and felt the particular quality of a morning that exists on the other side of something difficult, not triumphant, not clean, real in the way that things are real when you have paid for them with something actual. State investigation moved faster than Cole expected. Within 36 hours of the night on the ridge, Special Agent Briggs had a name. Not from the scanner log alone. The log established timing, but not identity directly. It was the combination of the log intercepts matched to duty roster records, cross-referenced with cell tower data, showing a department-issued phone-making contact with one of the arrested suspects, numbers on 4 separate occasions during the 11-month operation that produced the name. Watch Commander Dennis Farrell, 18 years with Blackwater County Sheriff's Department. Commendations in 2019-2021. The man who had received the pre-operation briefing at 4 hours out. The man whose frequency rotation schedule had ended up on a folded paper in an arrested suspect's jacket pocket on a rainy ridge in the middle of a storm. Cole didn't hear it from Briggs directly. He heard it from Claire, who called him 3 days after the night on the ridge while he was sitting on his porch in the afternoon light with his ribs taped and Ranger asleep on the boards beside him and a cup of coffee that had gone cold because he'd forgotten about it. They arrested Farrell this morning, she said. How'd he take it? Quietly. A pause. His lawyer was there in 20 minutes. Someone had called ahead. His lawyer or theirs? That's the question, isn't it? Her voice had the flat, careful quality of someone discussing something they've been processing for days and haven't finished with yet. Briggs thinks there's a second layer. That Farrell wasn't running things. He was just the access point. Someone higher up was managing the operational security side. Does that change what happens to Farrell? Not much. He still faces 11 counts minimum. The cooperation question is whether he gives up the people above him. She was quiet for a moment. I don't know. I thought I knew Dennis Farrell. We worked together for 4 years. She paused. Thought a lot of things. Cole didn't fill that silence. He let it be. Luke's back at work, she said eventually. Light duty. The concussion cleared faster than they expected. He asked about you. Said to tell you. She paused. and he could hear something almost like amusement behind the careful. He said to tell you he understands now why you kept saying I know instead of answering questions. He said he'd ask different questions next time. Cole looked at the tree line. The same trees that 3 nights ago had been full of dark shapes and deliberate movement. They were just trees now, fall-colored, bright, the kind of amber and rust that the Tennessee hills do in autumn, with the particular extravagance of something that only gets to do it once a year. Next time, Cole said. He means it as a compliment. Are you doing okay up there? Ribs are better. Shoulders still a problem. That's not what I asked. He looked at his coffee. Cold. He wrapped his hand around the cup anyway. I'm okay, he said. He paused, trying to find the honest version rather than the easy one. Takes a couple days. For the body to finish telling you about itself. And for the quiet to stop feeling like it's waiting for something. A moment of silence from her end. Yeah, she said. What you mean? He believed her. Briggs wants to meet with you again, she said. About your statement that's closed. About something else. Something else he wouldn't tell me. He said it was separate from the investigation. She paused. Cole, he's the kind of man who does his research. Before he meets with someone, he reads everything there is to read. I know the type. So he knows more about your background than what you told him on the porch. Cole was quiet. I'm just telling you, Claire said. You're not surprised. I'm not surprised, Cole said. Tell him I'll meet with him. Briggs chose neutral ground, not his field office, not the cabin, not any location that belonged to either of them. A diner in Kenton, midweek morning, the kind of place where the coffee is not good and nobody cares because they come for the booths and the noise level and the anonymity of public space. Cole got there first. He took the booth in the back left corner where he could see the door, which Briggs would notice and either appreciate or file away depending on what kind of man he was. Briggs arrived 4 minutes after the agreed time, which was either traffic or a choice. He slid into the booth across from Cole and ordered coffee from the server without looking at the menu and looked at Cole for a moment before speaking. Shoulder healing, he said, slowly. Ribs? Better. Briggs wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. I'll get to it. Your service record. I was able to access what's accessible, which is not everything. Your jacket has more redactions than pages, frankly. What I could read was enough to tell me that your 11 years were not typical. Most people's aren't. Yours specifically. Briggs looked at him steadily. 4 deployments to active conflict zones. 2 joint task force assignments that the public record doesn't specify the nature of. Commendation that's listed as classified. And an exit that was characterized, as he paused, choosing the word carefully. Voluntary separation under personal circumstances. All of that's accurate. You could have stayed. Most people in your position would have. Mia needed a father, more than the Navy needed another operator, Cole said. He said it without defensiveness, just as the fact it was. That calculation is not complicated. Briggs nodded. The work you've been doing for the county. The communications survey. What about it? It's good work. The gap analysis you filed, I've looked at it. The dead zone mapping across the ridge system is more thorough than anything the State Emergency Management Office has produced in the last 5 years. Briggs paused. There are 23 communities in this county that have unreliable emergency communications coverage. Survey identified all 23 and proposed relay solutions for 16 of them. Cole said nothing. Waited. The traffickers used your data, Briggs said. That bothers you. It does. It should also tell you something about the quality of the work. He turned his cup. Spoken with the county emergency management director and with 2 people from the state office. There is interest in expanding your contract. Significantly. Cole looked at him. You're not state emergency management, but I work adjacent to a lot of people who are, and I make recommendations that carry some weight. Briggs met his eyes. The ridge system is not the only place in this state where emergency communications are compromised. And the events of 3 nights ago demonstrated that communication dead zones are not just inconvenient. They're exploitable. That's been true for a long time. Been recognized more recently. Briggs paused. There's also a specific thing I want to raise, and I want to be direct about it. Go ahead. The response on the ridge. What you did in those hours, the threat assessment, the perimeter, the tactical decisions. That's not radio technician work. No, Cole agreed. It isn't. The county would benefit from someone with your specific combination of skills, technical background and the other background. Briggs chose his words with care. There's been a conversation at the state level about a civilian liaison role, working with county emergency management and with law enforcement on communication security, identifying vulnerabilities before someone else does. Cole looked at the table, at the coffee, at the ordinary diner noise around them. I have a daughter, he said. I took this job because it was local, because it was work I could do and still be home. The role I'm describing would be based here, Briggs said. Blackwater County as home station. Travel within the state is needed, but structured. The schedule you had before. You thought this through. I do my research, Mr. Barrett. As I was told, you'd been informed. Cole looked at him, and something in him was turning this over not quickly, with the automated efficiency of a professional decision, but slowly, the way you turn over something that has weight to it, and you want to understand the shape of before you decide where to put Tsitsi. I'd need to understand the specifics, Cole said finally. Of course, and I'd need it in writing. All of it. Hours, reporting structure, compensation. That's reasonable. And if at any point the structure changes in a way that compromises my ability to be where I need to be for my daughter, the agreement ends. Negotiable. Briggs looked at him across the table. Negotiable, he confirmed. They sat with that for a moment. I'm not saying yes, Cole said. I'm saying I'll read what you put in front of me. That's enough for now, Briggs said. Cole drove back up the mountain in the early afternoon. The access road was clear. The fallen pine had been cut and cleared by the county forestry crew within 48 hours of the incident. The logs sectioned and moved to the side of the road, the root crater already starting to fill with the debris that forests produce constantly in their indifference to human events. Cabin came into view around the last bend, the same way it always did. The dark wood, the porch, the specific rightness of a place that has been lived in, enough to take on the shape of the life inside it. He parked and sat. He did this more often than he used to sat in the parked truck before going inside, using the transition. In other parts of his life, there had always been formal decompression structures, the rituals of returning from one context to another that military service builds into its rhythms, whether or not you recognize them as rituals at the time. Civilian life didn't have those structures by default. You built your own or you didn't, and the consequences of not building them were the kind that accumulated slowly and showed up in the wrong places. He'd built this one. 2 minutes in the parked truck, just sitting. He went inside. The cabin was quiet in the way it was quiet. Before all of this, the particular silence of a building on a mountain that has only one occupant, most of the time, the absence of noise that is different from emptiness. He'd cleaned it as thoroughly as he could with one functional arm across the 2 days after the edit, and the county had sent a crew to repair the door frame and replace the window that had cracked. The new frame was lighter wood than the old one, slightly jarring in the way that repaired things often are. The evidence of damage repaired, but not erased. Cole walked through the main room and stood in the kitchen and looked at the table where his notebook still sat, closed, with its last entry in his handwriting. He opened it. Signal confirmed suppressed. Source identified and disabled. 312 hours. Will require full documentation. He picked up the pen. Below it, he wrote, Survey to continue. Full ridge assessment. 31 dead zones remaining. Starting Monday. He closed the notebook. 3 weeks later, Claire drove up the ridge on a Tuesday afternoon with a manila folder and a box of pastries from the bakery in town that she set on Cole's porch without explanation, and that Mia immediately and enthusiastically investigated. She's exactly how I pictured her, Claire said, watching Mia open the box, with Ranger Prescott in hopeful attendance. Let him have any of those, Cole told Mia. I know, Mia said, in the tone of someone who has been told this before and finds it both correct and unfortunate. Claire handed Cole the folder. He took it and looked at the top page, a state letterhead, the emergency management seal, a contract summary that matched what Briggs had described in the diner with the specific additions they'd negotiated across 2 subsequent calls. Briggs asked me to bring it personally, Claire said. He said you'd be more likely to actually sign it if someone was standing there. He's not wrong. Cole read through the first 2 pages. The scope was what they'd discussed. The hours were what they'd agreed. The reporting structure went through the county emergency management director with a state liaison, which kept the chains clean. He also asked me to tell you something, Claire said. Cole looked up. He said the jammer model you recovered. The serial number traced back to a procurement channel that goes through 3 shell companies and eventually back to a logistics firm that the federal investigation has been building a case against for 2 years. She paused. Your evidence filled a gap they'd been working around since the beginning. Cole looked at the contract. 1 night's worth of data that they'd been trying to get for 2 years, Claire added. Triumphant. Just factual. Good, Cole said. Just that. He signed the contract on the porch railing, using the envelope as a hard surface, with Mia throwing Ranger's battered tennis ball across the yard in the afternoon light and the dog running it down with the same earnest commitment he brought to every retrieval, regardless of how many times the ball had made the same trip. He handed it back to Claire. She put it in the folder and looked at him. This doesn't mean you're back in anything. Communications work. Civilian. Whatever Briggs implied about your background being relevant. What? I know, he said. It's the work I was already doing, with a better scope and a cleaner mandate. He looked at the yard, at Mia and Ranger running the geometry of their afternoon in the low autumn light. That's what I wanted. She looked at him for a moment, then at the yard, then back at him. Something in her expression did a thing that wasn't quite a smile, but occupied the same territory. Luke's coming off light duty next week, she said. How is he? Talking too much, which the neurologist says is a good sign. He wants to have you over for dinner. His wife's idea, but he agreed to it, which for Luke is basically the same as initiating. Cole almost said no. The instinct was immediate and familiar, the reflexive decline of a person who has spent years in social retreat, who has organized his life around the manageable radius of his daughter and his dog and his work. The instinct that says simpler is safer, and has been correct often enough to feel like wisdom even when it isn't. He said instead. Claire looked like she'd prepared for the refusal. Saturday, 6 o'clock, I'll be there. She nodded. She started toward her vehicle, then stopped and turned back. The night on the ridge, when you came back in through the utility door, and you told me what you'd found out, she stopped. Organized it. I had about 30 seconds where I genuinely did not know if we were going to be okay. The general professional uncertainty, kind of not knowing. The real kind. Cole said nothing. I want you to know that when you said the word right and picked up the cord, she paused, was the moment I stopped being scared. Not because I thought everything was going to work out. Because you were the most prepared person I'd ever seen in a situation, and I didn't have to figure out the next part alone. He looked at her. The afternoon light was doing something specific to the ridge behind her, that Tennessee autumn light, amber and horizontal, the kind that makes everything look like it has weight and history to it. You held the radio, he said. When the jammer went down and you had 60 seconds, you were already on the frequency. That's why it worked. We're trading credit, she said. We're being accurate. She looked at him for a moment. Then she got in her vehicle and drove down the mountain. Cole stood on the porch and watched the dust settle behind her taillights. Mia came up beside him and leaned against his arm. Yet, he'd intervened. She smelled like grass and dog and the particular clean air smell of a child who has been outside long enough for the outdoors to become part of her. She looked up at him. Was that the police lady from the mountain? Is she nice? Cole thought about it. She's good at her job, he said, and she doesn't quit when things get hard. Mia considered that. Basically the same as nice. Close enough, Cole said. Ranger dropped the tennis ball at Mia's feet and looked at her with the absolute democratic optimism of a dog who believes every moment is an appropriate moment for the ball to be thrown again. Picked it up and threw it badly. She always threw it slightly right of where she intended. Some mechanical habit that Cole had twice tried gently to correct and then abandoned because it didn't seem to diminish anyone's enjoyment of the game. Ranger retrieved it, brought it back. Cole watched them run the yard in the last of the afternoon light, his daughter and his dog in the amber October air on a ridge in Tennessee, the mountains going blue and purple in the distance the way they do at the end of a clear day, the sky moving toward its evening colors above the tree line. Thought about the notebook on the table, and about the 31 dead zones he'd start mapping on Monday, about the relay tower proposals that needed drafting, and the county commission meeting in December, where he'd been asked to present findings. About Luke Mercer's dinner on Saturday, and the slight discomfort of that, and the decision to go anyway. He thought about the other things, the ribs still aching, on cold mornings, the sound the front door had made when it gave way, the specific weight of the fourth man's body, and the 2 seconds that Mercer's appearance in the doorway had provided. He thought about those things the way you think about things you've paid for, clearly, flinching, and without dwelling. He'd spent 4 years trying to be done with what he'd been, trying to put the skills and the instincts, particular wiring of a trained person in the worst situations into a sealed compartment and live on the other side of it. The mountain had told him something different. Not that the old life was waiting for him, not that he should go back to anything, but that what he'd learned in those years, the patience, the assessment, the ability to stay calm when calm was the hardest thing to be, those things didn't have an expiration date. They had an application. Right here, these mountains, these dead zones, these communities where a storm could isolate someone or something could go wrong, and the silence of a failed radio was the difference between help arriving and help not arriving in time. He'd thought his hardest chapter was behind him. Instead, it had been preparation. Threw the ball again. Ranger ran. The mountain did its evening thing, and the sky went colors that didn't have names, and Cole stood on his porch in the cold, clean air and breathed. People no one thinks to look at twice are often the ones who already know exactly what to do when the lights go out.